So this movie Venom is getting torn up on Rotten Tomatoes, torn up on social media. People are not liking this movie. And after seeing the movie, I kind of understand why. So this is my review of Venom 2018's movie. I want to start this review by first telling y'all that I have a real huge soft spot for Venom. Now, I went into this movie with a completely open mind. I knew they were going to change the storyline from the comics. I knew there wasn't going to be any Spider-Man, and I'm going to get to that here in a minute. I knew it would be a self-contained story using the Venom likeness and character from the comics, but it wasn't going to really tell the true story of Venom. I knew that going in, and I wasn't bothered by it. But I think one of the reasons as to why people are probably going to trash on this movie is if you're a hardcore Venom fan. I mean, here's the thing about me. Look, Venom was one of the first storylines, maybe the first one that I ever got familiar with when I was a kid getting into the Marvel Comics. In third grade, I read all about the Marvel Comics, collected the cards, played the games, the comics were there, and Venom was a huge part of that early 90s boom. You know, when the Spider-Man animated series came out, we all wanted to see Venom. And even though Venom is an 80s character that Todd McFarlane created, I feel like the previous generation before me that got into Spider-Man, their main villain, like their favorite villain is like Doc Ock or the Green Goblin or one of these guys, or, you know, whoever, Kingpin maybe. For me, it was Venom. If you grew up in the 90s, if you're an 80s baby that grew up in the 90s and that's the Spider-Man that you read, Venom was your dude. And so, again, still, with that being said, I knew going into this movie that it wasn't going to be at the comics. So if you're waiting for a movie that's like the comics, it's just not, you're not going to get it here. You're just not going to get it. Now, a couple of misconceptions that I want to clarify right now, because there were a bunch of rumors going into this movie that wound up being false. The first rumor was that Tom Holland reprises his role as Spider-Man and makes a cameo in this movie. That does not happen at all. There is no Spider-Man at all in this movie with the exception of, and this is not a spoiler, but there are two post-credit scenes, and the first one actually has a story progression and a tease for a sequel to this movie, but the second one is pretty much has nothing to do with this movie. It's just literally a trailer for the animated movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse coming out in December. I'm not kidding. Like the mid-credit scene, stay for that. But if you don't really care about Into the Spider-Verse, or if you're going to see the clip anyways when it gets online, just leave the theater. There's no reason for you to wait until after the credits, because it's not like they're teasing a movie within this same spider universe that Venom is creating. This is a totally different universe. In fact, the trailer starts out by saying in another universe. It's an animated movie. So you got a trailer for an animated movie by the same studio at the end of this movie, but it has nothing to do with Venom at all. Nothing to do with them. It's a totally different thing. They're putting out basically what's going on right now in the film industry when it comes to Spider-Man is you've got the Spider-Man in the MCU universe, you've got Venom in this new Sony Spider-Verse that doesn't have Spider-Man in it for some reason because he's in MCU, and then you have the animated universe, which is also in Sony. So just letting y'all know that. The other rumor that was fake is that they said that Venom was in this movie for only 5 minutes and that it's Eddie Brock throughout the most of the movie. No, that's not true. That is not true at all. Now, I want to talk about the good and the bad of this movie. The movie is getting bad reviews, and there's a reason why, but I didn't walk out of this movie angry like I did when I saw Transformers the last night, but I did walk out of it feeling empty, and I walked out of it feeling not very excited about the future of this Spider-Verse. I mean, the mid-credit scene, it did pop me, even though we had heard rumors about this and what they were going to do with it. And it popped me because I remember these storylines as a kid, because it is a teaser for a future film. But without Spider-Man there's a key element to Venom that's missing, and that is the whole idea that Eddie Brock starts out as kind of a jealous bully and eventually gets responsibility with his powers and becomes an anti-hero. That's not Eddie Brock in this movie whatsoever, and it's a totally different character. Eddie Brock in this movie, it really reminded me a lot of Jim Carrey's The Mask, the way that Tom Hardy performed this character. Now, Tom Hardy, I'm a huge fan of the actors in this movie. You got Tom Hardy, you got Riz Ahmed, you got Michelle Williams. Michelle Williams is like an Oscar level actress, right? And Tom Hardy is great. All these actors are great, and the script and the characters they're playing are so one-dimensional, so predictable. it was a waste. Like, you had these great actors and it was a waste. Eddie Brock is, of course, a reporter, and he stumbles upon this crooked science corporation that is investigating this alien life form with the idea that if you fuse with it, if the symbiote takes over you, it could lead to possible immortality, but it winds up being the reverse of that, and that's where the plot kicks off. Riz Ahmed, of course, plays the stereotypical and generic crazy obsessed scientist. I mean, it's literally the same character except less, I guess, overacted than the Green Goblin was in the first Spider-Man movie, or even Doc Ock in the second one. You know, the crazy scientists that are driven for a righteous cause, but they're actually out of their freaking minds and let people die. That's pretty much Riz Ahmed. And then when his character ends up climaxing, and it goes into this sort of Hulk abomination type of thing. If you've seen The Incredible Hulk, you know what I'm talking about. When he actually, it's in the trailer, when he fuses with the Riot symbiote, he does nothing. Like, nothing in this movie. There's a fight, right, in this movie between Venom and Riot, right? That was the most annoying fight to see since, like, the Batman Begins stuff. Remember how in Batman Begins, they have these really weird cutaways when Batman's kicking ass and, like, everything's really smoky and hard to see? This was that times a million, because Batman Begins at least makes sense because Batman's a ninja, and Christopher Nolan wanted to make it to where you couldn't see him. You know, he's a ninja. That's fine. It didn't bother me in that movie, but it did annoy some people. There's a scene here where there is so much going on screen that it's literally like I'm watching this scene of the two symbiotes fight, and there's so much CGI on the screen and so many things going on with them throwing each other around. Their body parts became weapons. And the thing that's crazy is, this is the kind of stuff that I love. This is the kind of stuff that I wanted to see in this movie. Like, I wanted to see the symbiotes fight. I wanted to see, you know, Venom's tongue and all these cool things. I wanted to see all that stuff, but it's hard to see. Like, the fight was so annoying, dude. Like, all you see is two big globs on screen because there's too much going on. It's almost like how in those Michael Bay Transformers movies I mentioned earlier, when they're morphing, when they're transforming in the sky, it's like a bunch of, like, crystallized CGI, and it doesn't look very good. It just, you know, it just is annoying, and this movie made it actually worse. The one good thing I will say about Venom that Venom fans will be happy about is that his portrayal is much better in this movie than Spider-Man 3. You know, Topher Grace is not Eddie Brock, but to be honest with you, I don't even think that Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock, because Tom Hardy's version of Eddie Brock is a different dude. He's fidgety. He's very comical, but almost to the point where it's over the top. He's overacting in a lot of the stuff, but I don't blame him too much for that. Like I said, it reminded me a lot of Jim Carrey's The Mask. I mean, there's a lot of similarities here. He was okay. He was fine. He's better than Topher Grace, but the thing about Venom is the way he looks is amazing. I mean, he looks great. He's gigantic. He's scary. Venom actually looks frightening, which is what he did not look like in Spider-Man 3. I couldn't stand how tiny he was and screechy he was. This Venom is much more to the spirit. And I'm talking about Venom, not Eddie Brock. To the spirit of the Venom comic. You know, big, strong dude. Now, the spider powers, because there's no Spider-Man, are obviously not in this movie. However, it's pretty clear early on that Venom doesn't even need the spider powers. You know, Venom in the comic books, because during the Black Costume Saga, the symbiote was on Peter Parker. When the symbiote went to Eddie Brock, not only did Eddie Brock find out, like, all kinds of secrets about Parker, but he also developed his powers and enhanced, like, he took his powers. So he, got knowledge of them, so he can web sling, and he has spider sense. Well, in this movie, Venom has a version of spider sense because he sees things happening before they happen. Like, he'll tell Brock in his head, don't open the door, and then boom, boom, boom. Like, he knows he can sense things. It's like a spider sense, but there's no spider. Also, there's no sense in doing web shooting because his symbiote body can stretch out and shoot out and stick to things. So it really did remind me a bit of, like, Spawn, another McFarlane character, in the way that movie looked versus this one, even though I think this one has way more CGI. I mean, Spawn came out in 1997. But the Venom powers, I thought, were fine in this movie. They also kept the idea that Venom is weak to fire and to sonics, to audio. So I like the fact that they did that. So there are good things about the movie. Don't get me wrong. The action scenes there's a scene with and all these comic book movies have the same stuff in them now. They're kind of getting repetitive. You've got a scene in the streets with cars, a car chase scene where he's on a motorcycle. Every comic book movie has a damn car chase scene, and that's fine. Like, they're getting kind of played out to me, being real with you. But this one I thought was great. In this movie, they did it very effectively. It was a good way to showcase Venom's powers. Now, what basically happens with the movie, the problems with the movie is that it doesn't have an identity. The first half of it really is played up for comedy. Then it gets really, really serious, like very like tonally changed, and then it goes back to comedy. And all these comic book movies nowadays are relying so much on this comedy. Like I know that Marvel was able to execute that well, but it seems like other companies and other movie directors just can't do what Marvel can do. I mean, Last Jedi tried it too. Like the comedy stuff, not every movie has to be like this with quips and, slapstick, and this movie has a lot of it. But one of the things that I think makes the movie awesome is the character of Venom, the symbiote itself, the sentient life form. Because what basically ends up happening is when the symbiote attaches itself to Eddie Brock, basically what happens is the movie becomes a buddy cop movie. It literally feels like a buddy cop movie, except that the buddy is inside of Eddie Brock. The buddy, of course, being the symbiote. They talk to each other. They argue with each other. There's scenes where Eddie Brock is like telling the symbiote, he wants to eat him. And instead Eddie Brock's like, no, he's my friend. It's like that whole, angel devil thing. And I did like that a lot. That was the most entertaining part of the movie. I thought that Tom Hardy did great with those scenes. But Tom Hardy just tried to come off like this New Yorker, and it was very hard to swallow. I didn't buy him as a New York guy. And of course, his previous comic book movie that he did was Dark Knight Rises, and I thought he was tremendous as Bane. I love the Bane in that movie. But in this movie, he's almost like being poorly directed. I mean, they all were. You've got characters that are either very one-dimensional and very predictable, or you've got characters that are trying too hard to be funny or really, really boring, and that is one of the problems with this movie. Overall, though, okay, I didn't hate this movie at all. I actually enjoyed some of it. I just feel... I don't think the movie deserves the hate that it's getting, okay? Right? Like, if you look at this movie and you're not a hardcore Venom fan, you'll probably enjoy it more than if you are, and if you're thinking about the comics. If you forget about the comics, you'll enjoy some of the movie, but the movie just drags on when it shouldn't, and it's, inconsequential. The final scene in the film is very, very rushed. Like, things just happen, and there's no sense of gravitas. They don't take time to let things breathe. It becomes a roller coaster ride at the end, and not in a good way. Again, the editing was just really, really bad. Like, the editing just felt like they're jerking you around, but not in a good way. You know what I mean? Not in a good way. Like, your eyes don't have time to adjust to what you've just seen because there's too many things going on at once on the screen. And that's a mistake that I think a lot of people have made when they make movies. But I'm not a filmmaker. I'm just saying that that's the way I felt watching the movie. So overall, I mean, I had a good time watching it, but it wasn't a great time. Honestly, I say whether or not you're a Venom fan, you should probably skip this one. But it's not as bad as everybody says. If you want to watch it on Netflix someday or Redbox, that's fine. But if you're asking me, should I spend my money on this today? You don't have to. You really don't.